Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us for tonight's program. Many of you may know me, but I'll introduce myself anyway. I'm Carolyn McGuire, Program Manager here at the Athenaeum, and I'm honored to introduce tonight's speakers on the subject of military language and combat poetry. And I hope that you consider joining us next Friday for another program, The Hard Work of Hope, with Michael Ansara and Professor Drew Darian. That'll be next Friday at 7 o'clock. But tonight, I'd love to welcome Janet McIntosh, Professor of Anthropology at Brandeis University, who is a prize-winning cultural and linguistic anthropologist who has conducted work in East Africa and the United States. Her books and articles explore colonialism, religion, ethnic conflict, political language, and the language of the U.S. military. Her work has been supported by the Fulbright Foundation, the ACLS, and the National Endowment for the Humanities. Her most recent book, Kill Talk, The Language and Military Necropolitics, was published by Oxford University Press. Welcome, Janet.
Thank you so much. Thank you, everyone, for coming out this evening, and thank you to the Salem Athenaeum and to Carolyn McGuire for bringing them to fruition. Yes, I'm Janet McIntosh. I'm very honored to be joined by my friends and collaborators who are all Vietnam veterans, and they're all writers and published poets, and all of them hold deep anti-war convictions. And in alphabetical order, they are Doug Anderson, who served as a Navy corpsman, in other words, a medic, attached to a Marine infantry battalion. He's the author of a memoir, and he's also a widely recognized award-winning poet and author of many volumes, including The Moon Reflected Fire. Preston Hood, who served in Vietnam with SEAL Team 2 and has published his poetry in many journals, presented at many events for peace, and he's the author of books and chapbooks, including a poetry collection titled A Chill I Understand. And finally, Marc Levy, who served as a medic with Delta 17 1st Cavalry in Vietnam and Cambodia. And his books include How Stevie Nearly Lost the War and Other Post-War Stories, and The Best of Medic in the Green Time, Writings from the Vietnam War and Its Aftermath, which emerged from his extensive archival website called Medic in the Green Time. Please do search for it. It's extraordinary. It features Marc's writing and a great deal of accounts from other Vietnam veterans. So a fourth Vietnam veteran and writer friend can't be here tonight, but we have found a way to present some of his writing in his absence. His name is Dave Connolly, and he served as a rifleman with the 11th Armored Cavalry, and he has authored, among other things, a poetry collection titled Lost in America. So I met all of these men while I was doing research for this book that came out earlier this year, Kill Talk, Language and Military Necropolitics. And at today's event, we're going to offer a kind of unconventional mixture of genres, since I'm an academic. So I'll tell you a little bit about my anthropological approach to language of the military, and then we will shift to the words of those who have lived through war, through Doug and Preston and Marc, and I'll start to weave in their thoughts and their writings and their poetry, and then I'll say a few words at the end to conclude. And I'll do a little mixture of just talking you through some ideas and a little bit of reading as well. So just to give you a sense of how this anthropologist started to think about the language of war and maybe some sort of terms to set, I think I should probably take a second to tell you what the word necropolitics even means, since it is a jargon word and it's in the title of my book. It sets the political stage for what we're going to be talking about today. So it refers to the state's power to determine who may live and who must die. In other words, who is disposable, who's more disposable than whom. And in war, of course, enemy combatants are considered disposable. Civilians who are on the enemy's terrain are certainly treated as relatively more disposable than civilians in the home front. And to some degree, the state recognizes that infantry combatants are disposable in the sense that some of them may well die in war. So a big purpose of this book was to explore the role of language in helping to shape the headspace, the mindset of infantry who are the proverbial tip of the spear, and to look at language's role and how a person can come to grips with the role of being what I call the state's killable killer. And absolutely, there are very, very powerful political, social, psychological, contextual forces that all play a role in people's willingness to go into these situations and also their ability to cope with them. But language offers an assist. So it can, for instance, provide a kind of anesthesia, it can be a kind of numbing agent, it can sometimes incentivize, it can help to shape the kind of personhood that you need to inhabit in order to cope with these situations, and generally help to maybe steer feeling and thought. So a couple things to say before I go any further. One is just a heads up. It's inevitable that some of the ugly language of war is going to issue from our mouths. But in the words of one veteran, a Vietnam veteran named John Musgrave, the language is the experience. He wrote that. He was writing, actually wrote a book of very powerful poetry about his combat experience. And he has a little apology in the preface for how strong the language is. And he says, and I'm sorry, but I can't pull apart the language from what I was and what I did. So, and also, you know, the bite of the words, the effect on subjectivity, this is part of what the book explores. So I have a long content warning at the start of the book, kind of explaining and justifying why I don't redact almost any words at all. And the second thing I have to add is that I wrote the book, and I'm also here today with humility. I consider service members and veterans the experts, obviously, on their own experiences, and their writings, their memoirs, are the most important resource in understanding how military life is lived. But what I did do was I brought a set of questions and some theoretical apparatus. I tried to play it down a little bit, but observations coming from my background as a linguistic anthropologist, I brought those to the table in trying to understand how language might play this role in coaxing and nudging and steering thoughts and feelings and actions in the military. And I focused in particular on how language is designed to cope with violence, and also to narrow a person's circle of empathy. So there's a liberal and progressive ideal that well, I call it universal empathy. Is in principle, empathy should be extended to all human beings, no matter their race, ethnicity, religion, gender, and so forth. And all humans deserve the same consideration for their suffering. And it's a lovely idea in principle. It's incredibly hard to implement in practice. And it certainly runs against the grain of the practicalities of the military, which as a machine of violence is, you know, trying to take lives when it comes to action and war, and military language reflects that. So the book travels from training to combat, and then to United States veterans like these gentlemen who have become writers and artists, and they found creative ways to consider wartime experience from a new angle and also in different language. And that's how I met all of these men. So with my remaining time here, I'm just going to tell you a little bit about the first chapter of the book, the first body chapter of the book, and that's all, but it'll give you a little taste of some of my approach, and then I'll turn over the floor to the three of them. So the first third of the book is about training language, and I focus in particular on language in the Marine Corps, which is the smallest branch of the United States military, designed to enter a combat zone first and hit hard and hold the line until everyone else shows up. And its training is recognized as having a reputation for being the toughest training in the United States military. And generally speaking, in Marine Corps training, the implicit reasoning is that you need to undergo certain kinds of stress to enter the hardship of war, and also to be willing to brutalize other people. And the language of training can be brutal too, and it's packed with lessons, and those lessons are what I really am looking at in this chapter. Some of them are crashingly obvious lessons that anyone can read off the surface, and some of them are, I think, a little subtler than that, but they're lessons about how to be a killable killer. And before I describe a little bit of just some details from this chapter, I will say there's a lot of variety in United States military training. All the branches have different training. Each of the men here underwent somewhat different training. There are different personal approaches when it comes to drill instructors and drill sergeants. And then there's kind of the history of political change when it comes to what we in anthropology call language ideology. And certainly after the Vietnam War, I would say for the last 3 decades or so, there has been a concerted effort to try to make the training somewhat less brutal on the recruits or draftee, or recruits now, recruits themselves. But I also would argue there's long been a kind of rip current in the direction of brutality. And certainly the current Secretary of Defense is like trying to haul that in the direction of more intensified brutality. He even said recently to the group of assembled military leaders that yes, you can put hands on recruits. He's talking there about physical abuse. He wants to make hardened warriors. You know, he's talking about a warrior culture. He's forgetting that the vast majority of service members never even see combat. But okay. So now let me give you a couple of examples, and then I'll let my colleagues get a word in edgewise. So the first example has to do with pronouns, not the type of pronouns that has been in the public discourse in the United States lately, but rather the fact that when a new recruit arrives at one of the 2 Marine Corps training depots in the United States, they're quickly informed they need to renounce the words I and me. This is not that easy to do, but instead you are to become, like in my case, I would become Recruit McIntosh or whatever your last name is. And it is a fascinating move, you know, without the I, where do you go? Where is your locus of individuality and opinion? And where is your past? How do you locate yourself? Only Recruit McIntosh speaks for you now, and Recruit McIntosh is a figure in a drama of the military's own making. So every time that you have a kind of first person statement, you have to summon yourself as if you are a cog in the military machine. And this is one of many steps in the whole 13-week rite of passage where the old self is being kind of ground down and sidelined and de-individuated and subordinated to the new kind of person that has to be built up in the new military identity. And then there's the topic of yelling and orders. So in the earliest weeks of basic training, yelling and confusing orders are sometimes used as a tool to disorient recruits and drown out individual thought. And I'm actually going to read you just a couple of paragraphs that come from a documentary, I think it's from 2005, just to give you a little sense of this kind of arrival. I think this example comes from the San Diego Marine Corps Depot. So here we have drill instructors or DIs, kind of creating frantic energy and encircling recruits and disorienting them. And sometimes they do a shark attack where they're all going to pile on one recruit. And so here's a partial transcription from part of this documentary. A DI yells so thick and fast, it's hard to catch what he's saying. If you're sure he's untucked, you gotta tuck it into your pants. If your buttons are unbuttoned, you gotta button your buttons all the way to the top. If your sleeves are rolled up, you gotta unroll them, you gotta cuff them with the cuffs. Scream, aye, sir. And that's the cue for the recruits to yell, aye, sir, which they do. They may not have understood anything that came at them, but they're gonna yell, aye, sir. As recruits fill out their paperwork at small desks, a female DI yells confusing instructions at close range and then orders, scream, aye, ma'am. If a recruit is sluggish or confused, a DI might repeatedly palm slam a desk or locker within inches of their face, like that. Scramble the papers as the recruit tries to write, or rock the surface until the papers fall off, sabotaging the very task they have told the recruit to carry out. In another room, dozens of new recruits stand at attention still in civilian clothes. A messy pile of their personal effects sits in a heap, and a female DI is rifling through them. She holds up a small notebook and addresses a recruit in a disdainful tone. What is this? Is this an address book? What is this? Is this something personal? Yes, ma'am, replies the recruit, knowing well enough not to show emotion. The DI tosses it to the ground with obvious disgust. She picks up more items, tossing them to the side as if going through a trash pile. Nothing personal is dear anymore. Okay, so meanwhile, there is a lot of yelling, some of it intelligible, some of it not so intelligible. And in the chapter titled Yelling, I unpacked some of the rationales for this. And some of the rationales are given to me by drill instructors or retired drill instructors themselves, talking about how, for instance, it's important to that the recruits not hesitate before following orders, so the yelling can drown out individual thoughts and replace them with orders, and the sense of anxiety that one must follow orders immediately or else. By the way, there is a tension between this imperative to follow orders immediately and the rule that you're meant to follow only lawful orders. Where does the pause to determine whether the order is lawful or not get a space to happen? And that is a tension that I talked to with a military lawyer about. It also, to give you a little jargon term, it's an example of what could be called sonic patriarchy. It's a kind of domination of space with sound, and recruits are learning something from drill instructors about the kind of military persona that they might exercise down the road as they dominate others. And there has been interesting work on the soundscapes of war and how they are a mode of domination. And then there's a fascinating twist I'll tell you about, which is that which happens when drill instructors' voices break down. So I had a chance to go to Parris Island, South Carolina, to that training depot. I was a fly on the wall for a drill instructors reunion, and I had a chance to just chat informally with some of the active duty drill instructors while I was there. And they kind of enjoyed regaling me with stories about how badly they had abused their own bodies in service of training the recruits. And they talked a lot of, I wanted to know about the vocal cords. They would say, oh yeah, they gave me stories of people bleeding from their vocal cords, getting a hernia from yelling too hard, waking up yelling in the night. One guy said, I crapped my pants, I yelled so hard. Some of them yell so hard they actually damage the vocal cords. It's not surprising. And then they start to sound guttural as they're yelling. It's kind of a raspy sound as they yell. As one Marine Corps veteran said, it sounds like a dead man yelling at you. This is a very telling statement. I think that when you hear someone screaming or yelling at you through what's obviously physical distress and pain, they're getting a model of how you put your body on the altar of the state. You have to actually sacrifice your body for the mission. You maintain your intensity even when you feel the searing pain. So it's an example of the many indirect lessons. The last example I will give you is about the insults that some drill instructors level at recruits. These have been subject to historical change, and they definitely vary according to drill instructor. Officially, according to the recruit training order, drill instructors are not allowed to demean recruits. Unofficially, unofficially they do. I mean, the transgression really varies depending on the moment, on the depot, on the individual, but they do. And it was easy to collect examples of insults. So it's, often they're dehumanizing one way or another. Often they're infantilizing or demeaning, sometimes feminizing. Just to give you a quick list of some examples that I collected, we have snowflakes, crybabies, whiners, weaklings, lazy bastards, maggots, hogs, crayon eaters, clowns, boneheads, shitbags, shitbirds, and then a raft of gender troubled insults like ladies, little girls, faggots, pussy, pansies, buttercups, cupcakes, sweethearts. The list goes on. So, I mean, the insulting recruits, if there's some classic rite of passage quality there, again, stripping away the old identity, grinding the person down so they're receptive to being refashioned in a new identity. They also encode lessons about what Marines are not supposed to be. In other words, childish, weak, feminine, and so forth. There's also an ideology that I kept noticing when talking to people about the insults that I called semiotic callousing, because the insults get talked about as if they're a kind of little projectile that interacts with the surface of the flesh and literally hardens recruits, making them more battle ready. I heard repeatedly statements like, these insults will strengthen up the skin, they'll toughen up the skin, you have to learn to let them roll off you, and so forth. It doesn't make any sense at one level, but as if insults might kind of make you more resistant to kinetic violence. But it's part of the overarching holistic logic of training language. And then finally, the insults do set the stage. I think that recruits are always learning, indirectly anyway, something about being a Marine or a combatant from the way that their drill instructors are treating them. It's not a perfect analogy, but sometimes there are aspects of this that resonate. So just as the recruits themselves have been dehumanized, brutalized, so too are they ultimately going to wreak something like this on the others. And actually, I remembered a quote that Preston himself gave me when I talked to him some years ago, where he said, the insults get you down into that core of blackness where you could do anything. And other veterans like Eli Wright, who actually did the cover art for the book, said to me very directly, well, we were dehumanized so that we could learn to dehumanize. So I think this is probably the moment for me to allow these gentlemen to kind of transition us into the extraordinary work of veterans who found ways to process their experiences in new terms and new language, sometimes interacting with those who had been on the enemy's side. So I'm going to turn the floor over first to Bill Wilderson.
Thanks, Jeff. The three of us up here, and David Connolly, who can't be with us tonight, unfortunately, we're all members of the Joyner Institute for the Study of War and Social Consequences at UMass Boston, which no longer exists in the form that I'm going to describe. It was started by an African-American vet named William Joyner, who died very shortly thereafter of complications from Agent Orange. The institute was taken over by Kevin Bowen, who was the director for many years. We began to collect veterans, many of whom you've probably heard their work. Bill Earhart, Bruce Weigel, David Connolly, us. We began to attract political people, Grace Paley, Gloria Emerson, Carolyn Forche, also the poet, Daisy Zamora, Gloria Emerson, the journalist, and Howard Zinn, who was a friend of the Institute for many years. And they kind of caught the spirit of what was going on there. Veterans after the war, many veterans, not all veterans, needed some way to process what had happened to them spiritually. And the war didn't make any sense, and the politics didn't make any sense, and they were hurting. And this is one of the things that brought them to the Joyner Institute. And many of them became writers, artists, filmmakers. And then the most extraordinary thing happened. We reached out to our former enemy, former National Liberation Front and People's Army of Vietnam, the people we've been killing and being killed by during the war. We reached out to them, and we found that some of them also had become writers. The novelist Bao Nin, who wrote The Sorrow of War, the poet Wen Zui, Tu Ban Huting, Win-Ba Chung, who lives in this country now and who was a translator and intermediary with Vietnamese. Long Thi Misa, Layman Quay, two women writers, Lady Borden, who was a member of the American Defense Service Committee who lived in Vietnam, which was an intermediary for us with this group of people. And it became an extraordinary thing. We went to Vietnam to visit them. We brought them over here for the writers' workshop in the summertime. Some of those friendships have become extraordinarily deep. It's an extraordinary thing. Anyhow, this is how we met Janet. Janet was looking for people to interview, and she landed upon us. That's my introduction about the Joyner Syndrome.
So if you're watching some of the slides that were being printed as you were coming in and waiting for a show to start, they were taken by a friend of mine who I was able to locate about a year ago. And at one point we were talking, and I said, "Do you have any photographs from the war?" And he said, "Yeah." And I said, "I'd like to use them for my website. How many do you have?" And he said, 350. So out of the 350, I took. He sent them to me on a thumb drive, and I took the best, and he gave me permission to make that slideshow. kind of related to that. Jack Parente was a rifleman in Echo 17 First Camp in 1970. I was in Delta. We didn't know each other. We met online just by chance. I asked him to write something for my website, and he did. And I read it, and I knew it was extraordinary the moment I saw it. It's called Song of the PFC. We said it each day of our miserable lives. We said it when it rained and when it didn't rain, when it was hot, when it was hotter. It don't mean nothing, we said. We said it because it sounded tough. We said it to keep from crying. We said it because it might be true. We said it at rest, and the blood-sucking insects swarmed, and our faces swelled, and our hands swelled, and our lips swelled, and our ears swelled, and we thought about getting sick with malaria, and we thought about how good that would be. You get malaria, you leave the boonies, unless you died first. But dreaming of laying asleep on a hospital cot, hot chow, no one shooting, made chancing a slow death easy. How bad could it be? It don't mean nothing, we said. So we ditched the big orange pills each day, took the small ones. Skipping them won't improve your odds, but when you're dog tired, why not? Anything beat humping the bush, but you don't do it. You shut up and saddle up because it don't mean nothing. We said it when dry sweat left white salt streaks on our stinking fatigues. Worn 5-6 days longer until clean ones arrived. No tiger stripes for us. Just the worn out junk, grubby with mud, sweat, bug juice, gun lube, red-brown blotches from crushed leeches puffed up the size of ripe grapes with blood. Our blood. Some guy's name tag stitched on the back pocket. The new ones, ragged in a day, rotting in 4. At night, wrapped in poncho liners on the jungle floor, we twist and turn and half sleep between shifts on guard. At dawn, waking a quart of water low. It don't mean nothing, we said. We said it when a jeep filled with ammo exploded, killing 11 men. Said it when the mess tent took a direct hit. Don't mean nothing, we said, after a sapper blew a bunker. The men inside hoped, burnt, crushed by sandbags and perforated steel plating. On a hilltop, taking AKs, mortars, and RPGs 175s too close for comfort. When they said, you can't retreat, just us 20 now, burned out, used up, wanting off that place that reeked of death, we thought for sure they'd pull us back. Instead, we stayed 10 days, C Company boosting our ragged line, bluffing our way past 12 dead, 26 wounded. We never spoke of it again. But who can forget the Battle of Hill 54, just one more story too sad to tell in a war that don't mean nothing. Well, war does me. No, just kidding. Psychologically and otherwise. Hope is usually a good thing to think about. But when I was in one of my darker moments, I wrote this poem about hope. Hope is running out the back door. Darkness falls in her wake. I see her on sleepless nights in the back slip with a gun in her hand. She's a coward for leaving us alone. Either way, it don't mean nothing. She's gone, holding her ass in her arms. What a fucking outrage.
then talking about language, music language for numbing. Filling with the name. We were taught to call the enemy gook, slope, dink, and worse, because it's easier to kill that way, easier to sleep at night if you've merely crushed a roach under your boot heel, sprayed poison down some hole, or set a whole village on fire to kill its vermin. But when we dragged that guy out of the hole and stood him up, and he blinked in the glare, all 5 feet of him covered in mud so that even his black pajamas were gray with it. He didn't look like anything you'd want to kill, in spite of his being a tough little ship, taking round after mortar round, rocket after rocket, and still firing back at us while his squad slithered through the leaves and got away. He just stood there, maybe hoping for a quick death, just a shot in the back of the head, no interrogator to slip a head pin under his nail. I knew then that I couldn't say gook again, could not joke about burning the poisoned land, where for reasons that grow dimmer, every year we were sent to fight a war. No. There was a Vietnamese word which we mispronounced, you can imagine. Xin loi, which means I'm sorry. I'm in the wrong book. And we used to say it sarcastically when somebody get killed, Xin loi, somebody loses his life, Xin loi. But it didn't mean that in Vietnamese. Xin loi. The man and woman Vietnamese come up the hill, carry something slung between them in a bamboo mat, unroll it at my feet. The child, iron gray, long dead. Flies have made him home. His wounds are from artillery shrapnel. The man and the woman look as if they are cast from the same iron as their dead son, so rooted are they in the mud. There is nothing to say, nothing in my medical bag, nothing in my mind. A monsoon cloud hangs above, its belly torn open on a mountain.
Okay, I got to Vietnam. Do what you have to do, you kill it. They train you so you don't even know the difference. Well, at least you don't want to know the difference. Or because if you do, you'll break down. And we're gonna win the war, supposedly. But in that long process, it really takes its toll as you go through it. Well, you don't know it until like 20 or 30 years when you come home. Well, nothing's wrong with me. I don't have PTSD, but we certainly did. And it's you know, Hood, you got a Cadillac body and a fucking Volkswagen engine. Hurry the fuck up, you're way behind. Things like that, and that's how they demean me. But in the process, I started writing a poem. I thought I could write a poem when I was over there in the first month of the war, but I could not write a poem the way I wanted. I think I wrote 13 or 14, maybe a half a page, and I ripped it up and threw it away. And I kept trying to write the poem and it didn't work. And then I finally, after much therapy and a bunch of other things I was doing, and try to live my life straight, I wrote Rung Sap. And this is whittled down from 5 pages that I once had to a page and a quarter. Rung Sap. I rappelled through the door of the gunship, thinking about someone to love. On patrol, I'm a hunter in the blackness, dozing off, hardened, tired of danger. I sate the enemy, waist deep in wrong sap, muscular legs standing executioner quiet, black, green smudge and sweat curled on lip. A snake stops me. I wade ahead, fall to myself like a stone. Enemy voices passing only meters away, the backdrop of dark, life's death. I scan the horizon for movement, count the bodies across the canal, wait until they slip into the mud. My mind is a red-brown blur of gauze for the wounded we torture. What's happening seems not true. 2 hours before dawn the next day, we insert my chopper on some Viet Cong farmer's land to interrogate the sympathizers and search for the mortar tubes the NVA shell us with. We demand revenge, the smell of rice at the jungle top, lazy orange mist shifting like smoke. In low silhouette, we control the ambush, our bodies surrounded by dark, the shadow of surprise suspended in us. Across the trail, wind rips nipper palm, fear crawling at our feet, a wounded man. We radio in an airstrike. The wounded lie with the dying. The dragged bodies hurried away. Disappear into bamboo. Blood trails along the river mark the company retreat. Abandoned bunkers, shallow graves dug quickly, brown uniforms and black pajama bodies, rice bowls and fish heads, children half buried in dirt. I am a man, half in the water, half out. My legs suck into mud. My hands hold me, my head outstretched, hasten to deliver me among the dead. I want to say a little something about this poem because finally wrote it like 30-something years after, and I was interviewed by this woman named Sherry Ryder. She was a therapist, and we put a book together with all people who had tragedies in their lives. And the one thing she told me, she told us each one, we wrote our stories and then she interpreted it to what she wanted to say. And one of the things she said is a lot of times when we're in a state of anxiety or fear or, something that's unreal, we cannot put the pieces back together. That we're broken up with this and that. And between many years of therapy and also trying to put myself back together, she said it's like putting blood to ink, like what a snake would do. So it was real interesting that I got out of that what I did. But it was important for me to write that poem because when I wrote that poem, a lot fell off me. And as you go through life with the PTSD, it's a little bit more and a little bit more, but it's always going to be there. You just have to learn to deal with it. And with that, I just want to write a poem. Read you a poem I wrote a couple of weeks ago. It's about PTSD, and it relates to that. I can find it again. Please be patient. Called How Do I Walk Away from What I Need and Love? Some days there's a flag snagged at half-mast when I travel the road with whitewash lost, waiting for the blackness off, wanting to fight the blackness off. I shout, motherfucker, motherfucker, stand tall, wipe all away the bloodstains of war sadness. But it never works. I do it for hope. I try in a new body, and if it's a breathless blue body, I gulp a bottle of Ripple and lick my fingers clear to the bone. Besides, I'm usually around to get a laugh from a kid sitting in a park with his parents nearby, lifting both hands to my cheeks, simultaneously squeezing down with my small finger of both hands on the eyelids and my arthritic thumb squeezing up from my mouth, bulging cheeks like a frog's, while my forefingers wiggle my ears and my tongue snaps in and out like a lizard. Yes, of course, there were laughs and kids' pursuit and parents shaking their heads. If someone asked me to stop, I'd smile right back. My head. Just a few, I had to do that. Because, you know, you have to make the best out of it. So, I'll let someone else get up and then I have a few more to read it, yeah.
Oh,
That shit and the weasel and I are behind this padding dike. And Victor Charlie's giving us what for. And Rat Shit, he lifts his head just a little, but just enough for the round to go in one brown eye, and I swear to Christ out the other. And he starts thrashing and bleeding and screaming and trying to get the top of his head to stay on. But we have to keep shooting. A B-40 tunnels into the dike and blows the weasel against me. He doesn't get the chance to decide if he should give up and die. Now I'm crying and I'm screaming medic, but I have to keep shooting. At this point, I always wake, and Big Black Jerome and Little White William, my brothers, are not dying beside me, even though I can still smell their blood, even though I can still see them lying there. You see, these two, they've been taking turns dying on me, again and again and again for all these long years, and still people tell me, forget now. It's called Food for Thought, 3 a.m. They moved in unison like dancers in a ballet. The Spider, 20 inches from my rifle. The Viet Cong, 20 feet farther out, in line, each, slowly, sliding a leg forward. I let the man take one more step, so as not to kill the bug. What I tried to do there was give you this vision of looking down my rifle, you know, and give you the feeling of how hard-hearted I was at the time, that I could put this spider's life up above this, really my contemporary, you know. He may have been my enemy, but I'm sure he was a 19-year-old kid too, you know.
it would stop.
So that was Dave Conlon. I couldn't be here tonight. I think the three of us have seen our share of combat, but Dave saw a level of combat I can't imagine. And I hope he gets better soon. I want to read a poem called Portrait of a Young Boy. I used to be in a veterans group in Beverly. We'd meet once a month or so. There were about 6 of us in this basement. Combined, crowded, cramped basement in the veterans home that's near this little convenience store. And one day this guy told this story about an event that he experienced. He was a crew chief in a helicopter. And I told him, I'd like to see that on my website, why don't you write it up? And he couldn't. He said, why don't you do it? So it's the second time it's happened to me when I've asked someone, write that up. And they've said, no, you do it. So this was about this fellow named Tom. Portrait of a Boy at Dawn. The green metal bird shimmies north along the muddy banks, sweeps south, flying high, low, a risky business, feeling them out, the tall, slender reeds bowing beneath us. We bank hard right, dip again, blowing the green curtain down. The boy, equally stunned, his mud-laden AK no match in the forever time, his astonished face, his forever no, when rap flips him backward, his starry cartwheel, a bloody splash dissolved in mud. In the cool morning air, we nose up, thankfully pull away. His immense, frightened eyes follow me home, forever wake me.
The mass graves that way. After the siege of Clay and the enemy withdrawal, it was impossible to tell which dead were Arvin, NVA, or civilian, blackened as they were. And so those who buried them, kind in their exhaustion, wearing cloth masks against the stench, and pushed beyond all thought into the realm of ghosts, dragging the bodies into mass graves and covered them, without regard to who they were and where they stood in this long and mindless war. And so, as the land became fertile there, the vines and flowers thrived. Would that our dead had been buried with them, and our brotherhood be known.
Another thing that we'll probably hear a lot about is suicides. In 2014, 2012, the rate of suicides in the service of a country was 22 per day were dying. Now I just looked it up again and it's 29. And so many people are just, they get traumatic brain injury so bad that they can't deal with it, and just sends them into another realm of being a completely the amygdala takes over and they're lost. But anyway, my son is a Marine and he committed suicide. And I dedicated this poem called "A Glint of Hope," which is the title of my next book. After Suicide, for our U.S. Marine Corps, 1979 to 2001. I tried to glimpse clear air of mountains, the red-tailed hawks, dark and white streaks of day, in each of my muttering, stuttering hands. But my slow slip dark heart drops to a blackness I haven't felt in a while when I think of my son Arik in the old way. I want to hold him like a bud blue memory, long enough for my breath to come, as my grandfather held me when I cut myself with a knife. Out in storms threaten, beyond a pastel wind soothes my eyes. Sweet molecules of hurt in my DNA. There is so much more to grasp. Now I glide to clouds and sky, blood blend.
Well, after the first poem that ever got published that I wrote. This is called Peacetime. And then I think maybe we'll shift a little bit into it's just not all grim, because as Doug was saying before, through the Joiner Center, Preston and I have met the enemy and had some pretty emotionally moving, and emotionally charged encounters. But this is a little bit what war was like, the images that you saw. It's just kind of a narrative to those images. We gave it names like contact, movement, or bringing scum in. We psyched ourselves up, scowling, time to kick ass and take names later, but never talked about the human beings. This is how it worked. They walked into our patrol, or we walked into theirs, or we ambushed them, or they ambushed us, or we walked into each other, or they hit us with mortars, or we overran us with sappers, or booby trapped our booby traps, or hit us with sniper fire, or we called in artillery, or arc light, blue mats, Snoopy, or Rash. That's the way it went. Wait, engage, disengage. Between the contact and kicking ass or having our asses kicked was tension. It would start small, then build and build until we secretly prayed it would happen. And then we'd walk into them or them into us and so on and such, and the tension exploded like sex, and afterward was calm. And we'd be spent days, weeks, nothing would happen. Then terror, instant and deep, and relief like paradise, since the killing was done and the living had buried the dead. And it'd start all over again. That's how it was, that's how we lived. But for some, that's all there was and will be. And never mind the human beings. Never mind.
No, of course. I spent a few years around horses, which is very good for you. At 1968 to 2015, a Valentine. Clouds heaped 3 tiers high on the horizon. Lightning whitens the chambers tier by tier, all the way up, and again, thunder like arc light bombing, and more flashes. They're coming, the colonel said. If you get a heavy concentration of mortars on target or not, they're coming. Arc light along the ridge. There. And seconds later, the rumble with its hooves clattering toward me through the trees. Safeties clipped off like the chatter of cicadas. They're coming. Hear their hoofbeats. See the silhouettes of their helmets. Beneath the camouflage, flash and crunch, walking them in on us. Flash, shrapnel skittering through the trees brings down leaves. But now they lean their long faces over the fence. I unhook the gate and go in. They come toward me one by one. I rub them just below the mane and murder the whole big myth reel of him grabs my pocket flap with his teeth as if it were a tangled clump of brush that must come off. He grooms me like one of his own. This is love. They are coming, the thunder of them, the soft eye big enough to free fall into on the way to the gods, the ears straight up and listening, better than any human listening. I wander among them and greet them one by one, 32 of them. When they run, thunder like arc light, thunder like myth. The clouds lit tier by tier all the way up, flash and flash again, and the rain fragrant in the earth. They are coming and they are full of love and enchantment. The war that is happening always everywhere stops. Their heartbeats like arc light sending, the slow pulse of them, the knowing.
Well, in my section with 2 poems, a short one and then a longer one. I think we're going along, especially with my son's suicide and everything, you're always gonna have part of that with But one person was up and I was in an audience and we were having a question and answer period and he says, to me after I read the poem before, I read another poem about my son, and he said, why do you always write such poems that are so hurtful and painful? I said, well, I never thought of trying to write it a different way. And with that experience, I went back and I tried to look at my writing and said, well, what is hopeful here? Where do we need to go as people? And there's two poems that relate to that. How many tomorrows to get through yesterday? Dioxin gnaws like piranha eating flesh. Warriors who survive transmute the bleeding sky into dancing rain. Each waltz its own prayer. And the last poem I would like to read is Beauty is a Cardinal. Beauty is a cardinal. I cannot imagine being at war my entire life, like Bao Nin. I fought for 3/4 of a year, a river rat. It seemed long enough. Where in my body do I feel this emotion? Is there a center, a periphery? In my belfry sleepless dark, bats can't gnaw shame out of me. But a cardinal, peck, peck, pecking at the window, footsteps sneaking up, make me jumpy. Where is my awareness, my breath?
Wow.
Who said wow? Thank you.
Yeah.
That's the reason you came tonight. Well, I'm gonna follow that up in a way, tough act to follow. With the second poem that somebody told me the story and I said, write that. And they said, no, you write it. So the fellow who told me the story was Richard Levine, a poet, pretty well-known poet from Brooklyn. Casualty poem. At dusk, what hand dropped the metal bulb down the narrow tube, lifting it skyward? I was dreaming the moment the plummeting brightness struck, a dim noise. I was lifted, floating above myself. Below, the soft, fiery puffs of mortar shells, the firefly tracer paths, the glow of skittering shrapnel. Then all at once, when I crashed down, this lifting gift upended. In my absence, only my beating heart, everything breathing. Turning about, I woke to help them, but stumbled, fell, the back of my head, my chest too wet, too warm for comfort. Someone held my arms, legs, pressed white cloth, dim voices. Not gonna make it. Then waiting in the green trembling thing, doctors and more blood, this time good. A year of red dust, red rain, years to unlearn it. Of late, in the hills where I live, when the moon is low, the frozen sky flecked by starlight, in those still moments, by that hand, my darkness disarmed, I am uplifted.
Wow. My heart is actually pounding right now because of hearing these poems. I wasn't sure what the last poem was going to be, and so I was flipping through my notes trying to think about something to say about what poetry does, and in some ways you don't really need to hear this. But I will just give you a little observation from the critic John Berger, because that follows very well on Mark's final poem where he's really looking at one moment. Berger wrote that the poet approaches language as if it were a place, an assembly point where time has no finality, where time itself is encompassed and contained. And he felt that this lack of finality gives the poem and its observations a kind of immortality, which is very important to war poems because they can then honor and consecrate the magnitude of combat tragedy for war's victims, which very often include war's combatants, as if to speak back to the military apparatus, because you cannot erase people so easily. So I think to wrap up, I'm going to read, I'm going to try this. I thought that I might read the last couple of paragraphs of the book about Kill Talk book, because I have spent the book thinking about language in training, language in combat, the language of gentlemen like these who find new registers for thinking about what happened to them, what they did and what happened to them. So these paragraphs begin with a discussion with a veteran where we had been talking about ways to talk about killing, including this kind of the terrible slang register, bloodthirsty register, euphemistic language, which we hardly even touched about, the numbing language and so forth. And this veteran said, let me just ask you something. Is there a right way to talk about killing? Oh. So his implication stumped me. We anthropologists tend to be eager to problematize, but we rarely offer a solution. The military is a machine that specializes in violence, and in war it gives members of the military and the infantry a job so inhuman that the verbal assists that I described and that you've heard in some of these poems, these assists may prevent infantry from being paralyzed on the spot by guilt, fear, or grief. Phrases like "it don't mean nothing." After my explorations, I see that kill talk can sometimes enable terrible behavior, yet I also better understand why this language is there. Rather than scolding anyone for it, it seems wiser to direct collective energy toward questioning how the state picks its battles, given that they have come at such a terrible cost to all involved. That said, I've also described and worked with soldiers and veterans who managed to break free of the military's linguistic infrastructure to remarkable effect. They do speak differently about killing, in fact. This seems most likely to happen when they're no longer in the grip of combat or of their military service, giving them space to locate more cracks and openings in their empathic imagination. They may, for instance, begin to speak of their supposed enemies or their victims as relational beings. They may give them a backstory and a mind, no longer invisible, but vibrant, aspiring, fearing, suffering, and thoroughly intertwined with others. They give them kin, friends, a future. There is no snappy shorthand for this. The veterans who undertake this project linger on loss, question their government, and sometimes travel back to the scene of former battles to meet those they fought against. With their verbal and other forms of care, they honor that thing humans too readily deny, namely the reality of others' experiences. In doing so, they engage in the antithesis of kill talk and bring us closer to the lived truth of all the humans involved in violent conflict. They allow themselves and the rest of us with them to feel the heartbreak of war. Yeah. Thank you so much. It's 8:06, and if I understand some folks may need to leave because this was scheduled to be an hour-long event, but I imagine some of you may have questions for some of our veteran writers, and so maybe those who need to leave can leave now, and anyone who wants to stay on and talk can do so. Thank you so much again. Please feel free to get up.
Mhm.
Ask questions.